Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm back today for a new video on Forza Horizon 5, a video in which we're going to talk a little bit about car tuning. So, this video is going to be quite long and dense with information, so don't hesitate to rewatch the video several times, to pause, or even sometimes to watch in slow motion to clearly see all the sliders that we're going to modify on the screen. On this Forza Horizon 5, a few clarifications before we get to the heart of the matter. First of all, don't hesitate to check out the first video I made a few days ago about the car improvements in Forza Horizon 5. Especially if you are new to the Forza Horizon franchise, or if this is your first Forza Horizon game. Improving your car is necessary before properly tuning it. This will save you from wasting time tuning a car that, in the end, may not necessarily have the right performance parts to begin with, for what you want to do with it. Another thing, I know I'm not the best tuner when it comes to Forza Horizon settings. I often don't have the patience, in fact, to go into great detail to make my cars, let's say, ultimate racing weapons. Knowing that I change cars very often in the game, and that my thing is more about cruising. However, I have all the 4 days since Motorsport 2, and I know the 4-day physics very, very well. I know. We can say quite quickly how to correct a car's problems, whether it's roll, understeer, oversteer. I can still effectively optimize my car's speed, grip, and acceleration based on my intended use. I'm not the best tuner. Others offer better settings. Clearly, but let's say that with this video, I think you will have a good foundation. For later, customize your settings to prioritize quality. Also, and then, really, I promise, we will get to the point of the subject. Forza Horizon is a game that is simultaneously realistic and unrealistic. As for the car settings, in the sense that in this game, you will have several sliders in the settings. And clearly, you can do pretty much anything. Your car will always remain somewhat manageable if you do even a tenth of what we're going to do today in this video. In more realistic games like Forza Motorsport, there's a good chance your car will become completely unmanageable. So, on Forza Horizon, we can do some pretty extreme things with the settings, without it being too annoying. The game is realistic as the driving experience varies based on the car's transmission, chassis, and other characteristics. If it's a rear-wheel drive, a front-wheel drive, a four-wheel drive. If it's a car that has a turbo, a supercharger. For an older, smaller, or heavier car, the settings may not have the same impact on your vehicle. So, the game is quite realistic on that. And it's not because, in this video, we're going to make adjustments on a 2012 GTR that by applying these same settings on I don't know what, a Ford Raptor or a Mini, you will get the same result. Clearly, we're going to say that today, the goal is to share a little bit of the basics. So that, afterwards, you roughly know what each slider will modify, and that you can refine according to your car, according to what you want to do with it, and also according to your driving. That's it. I've made all the clarifications I wanted to. We're already at 5 minutes. Everything is fine. We're going to go into the settings menu. So the settings menu, there are two ways to find it. Either when you are on a free ride, you press start, you go to car and inset the car, or you go directly to the festival or to your house. In the car improvement section, you will find the adjustment box. This can also be accessed before starting a race. When you load the game just before the start, you can also adjust your cars. The simplest, I find perceived for me, is to do it in free ride. That way, I can adjust my car and test it without having too much load between each adjustment. To know a little bit about what the adjustment I'm going to make will do to the car. So we're going to go through the start menu, hop car, adjust the car, and that's where it starts. We'll start with the tires and proceed in order. Tire, ratio, alignment, anti-roll bar, spring, shock absorber, aerodynamics, braking, and differential. And I'm going to try to explain to you a little bit what each slider does. Knowing that there are menus that I know more or less well, and that in fact, there is really a lot to know about each setting. First, we'll discuss tires. There's not much to adjust besides pressure on most cars. It's around 2 bars by default on Forza Horizon 5 clearly, since it's a game that's not extremely realistic. As I was saying earlier, you can clearly lower the tire pressure to death by really setting it to the minimum. To have more road holding in turns, and to have better acceleration on the 0 to 100, even the 0 to 200 km/h above that. And for the top speed, it's a little bit detrimental. But since on Forza Horizon 5 the tracks where we really reach high speeds are quite rare, I prefer good road holding over a high top speed. In these cases, I often set the tire pressure to the absolute minimum, knowing that, in reality, you clearly shouldn't do this. and on other games either because it already ruins the tires much faster and it consumes a lot more gas. Except that on Forza Horizon 5, we don't necessarily have tire management, since it's something that can be disabled, and we don't have fuel management either. So as a result, we might as well, let's say, set the tire pressure to 0. Well, not 0, but to a minimum of 1. Regardless, it will only improve your road handling. However, if you go for the drift setting, in these cases, don't hesitate to increase the tire pressure by 10 or 20% compared to the default setting. If your car is at 2 bars, we would put in 2.2 or 2.3. This will slightly increase the tire pressure, you will have harder tires, and it will be easier to slide. Then, of course, you will need to test on each car to refine this with a bit more precision. So overall, for drag on short distances, don't hesitate to lower the tire pressure. For grip, don't hesitate to lower the tire pressure. If you're looking for a VMAX setting, in these cases, you should go for a higher pressure. And if you're looking for a drift setting, you should go for a higher pressure. For off-road, however, indeed, there too, a fairly low tire pressure clearly helps to ride on dirt and also to overcome quite a few obstacles. Next, we'll discuss gearboxes and gear ratios. I remind you that to unlock this, you will need to have your gearbox at least upgraded for racing. Below that, these settings won't be available. That's why I told you to watch the video. It's important. I made improvements because certain settings only unlock with specific improvements. So the gearbox, there are 2 big settings. Basically, you have the total slider, which will change the length of each gear of your car, let's say globally. And then, there is the possibility to adjust each gear independently of the others. There, in fact, depending on what you're going to want to do. Obviously, there are several quite different settings and several things to take into account. I would say the same, for the same reason I was saying, that we could put tires under quite low pressure. In Forza Horizon 5, despite having large highways, most circuits rarely allow reaching speeds of 248.549 miles /h. So, overall, we're going to look for cars that have a max speed around 400 kilometers per hour, and therefore, as a result, have good acceleration. So for that, indeed, we can already start by looking a little bit with this slider here. When our top speed, which is displayed at the bottom left of the screen in the left statistics, reaches around 400. So here, in these waters, 400 1.0, it's not bad in these waters. And then, adjust each gear according to the power you have, according to the transmission you have, to optimize your acceleration a little bit. For example here, I see that to reach 200 kilometers per hour, we will certainly be in 4th gear. I know I have a very powerful car, the Nissan GT-R, on this game in the 2012 version with full upgrades and almost 1,000 horsepower. So I know it has an engine that is quite powerful, quite torquey, and that I can easily handle it. A long first to reach over 100 kilometers per hour, a long second, clearly, because the engine will be strong enough to take it up to those speeds. And then, I can without worry put in slightly shorter gears to reach the max speed that I want to achieve. So that works pretty well, let's say for fairly classic races, like a circuit style, let's say, which mixes a bit of straight line and turning. Clearly, the less straight line you have, the more turns you have, the more interesting it is to bet on acceleration. If you do drag depending on the length of the track, the VMAX can also be important. Then, clearly, I often come, in the case now, in drag, where, in fact, I manage to make cars that have so much, in quotes, good accelerations that even if the others catch up with me at the end of the straight line, with a max speed higher than mine, I still manage to win because I have taken enough lead on the acceleration. So, it is indeed something to check, to test with each car. But indeed, in drag, depending on the length of the track, more acceleration or more speed. You will have to judge according to what you do. If you do drift, a long third or a long fourth can be interesting since it will allow you to drift at a good speed without having to constantly change gear. And take the risk, so to speak, of causing a break in your drift. Only do this with cars that are still quite powerful. Drifting with cars under 500 and 600 horsepower in 3rd or 4th gear can cause you to start drifting overall. Too long, they won't have enough power to maintain the drift throughout its duration. Length. If you're into off-roading, rallying, or arena for that matter, I clearly advise you to aim for acceleration, to clearly aim for a long 1st and 2nd gear, and then to set fairly short ratios. Because in off-roading, rallying, and arena, what matters is having good acceleration, having good power to accelerate right out of a turn or something like that. And life max? We don't really care. Reaching speeds of 186 miles RSH is quite rare on most rally or cross-country tracks in the game, especially when driving in categories lower than S2. But even in S2, it's not that common to have tracks on this game. In these driving styles, you will really have high speed points. So, in these cases, a good first, second, then third through sixth. Quite short. To quickly reach your max speed, and to have a lot of power, to have a car that is always nervous. We also have alignment, which, besides its functional purpose, has an aesthetic impact on your car. We will start with the front caster. In fact, it's going to be the angle at which your car is going to be tilted forward or not. So, the lower you set it, the straighter your car will be. The higher you set it, the more your car will be tilted forward. Leaning forward slightly can be helpful for accelerations. However, it can increase oversteer when exiting a turn, indeed, oversteer when exiting a turn. And so, it's quite annoying to have a car that is too leaned forward for circuits where there are a lot of turns. So, indeed, you have to measure it out. On the contrary, if you go towards the weaker, you will have a car that will be a bit more stable in turns. However, it can slightly harm the car's acceleration, and also its top speed a little bit. The alignment. Basically, there are 2 or 3 little things to know. Know that a car that has an alignment set more towards the outside will tend to have better grip in turns. However, a car with an alignment more towards the inside would have reduced effectiveness in acceleration and straight-line performance. Will have a better speed, so it will be more efficient in a straight line, but will clearly be less capable of taking your turns. For drag, aim more towards the inside. For drift, aim towards the outside. Even for classic races with some turning, you can increase the parallelism slightly towards the outside. It won't improve much because it can quickly become annoying. In other cars, it's poorly adjusted, but it will still improve things a little. Adjust sliders gradually by 0.1 increments when you have time and patience. It generally has good results on the cars on which I've done it. We also have the camber, so the camber, let's say, is the angle of the wheel relative to the ground. The more you go towards the negative, the more it's on the outside, let's say towards the outside of the car simply. Towards the sky, let's put it that way. Basically, a negative camber will make your wheels more tilted. And it's going to be good for drifting. It's going to be good for style too, because there are those who love cars that are slammed to death with a lot of camber. For style, it's true that it's stylish indeed, but for drifting, an increased negative camber, so there you go. More towards the positive will increase. Let's say your chances of making good drifts, of chaining drifts without worries, will even increase in fact on some cars, a little bit, your angle of camber. On the contrary, going towards a little more positive will make a car that will be, let's say, harder to drift, which will be more screwed to the ground, a little more gripped. However, avoid extremes. Just saying, on this kind of setting, don't put the negative all the way down or don't put the positive all the way up, because in the end, it will be counterproductive compared to what you want to do. And clearly, you won't have a better car by going to extremes on this kind of setting. So, in short, for drifting, lean towards the negative. For everything else, I would tend to say lean towards the positive, without clearly going into extreme values. Then, we have the anti-roll bars. So this is the magic of Forza Horizon. It's the only game where it does that. But, in short, the anti-roll bars have a huge impact on your cars, whether it's to correct the roll. So, the roll, it's when your car starts to sway in a turn on the opposite side of the turn. That is, if you have a left turn and your car starts to sway to the right, it's taking a roll. Clearly, this happens a lot on older cars, or on cars, let's say a bit big, which have really too soft suspensions. And on the other hand, it also helps to correct understeering and oversteering. So, understeering is basically when a car doesn't turn enough at the entrance of a curve that it tends to go too straight. And oversteering is when, generally at the exit of a curve or in the middle of it, the rear of your car tries to overtake the front. Basically when you go, let's say in mode, sideways across the road, in a bit of a drift mode, and it's just too much. The anti-roll bars work exceptionally well to correct this, with extreme values. For that matter, I find that, overall, all the cars in the game with four-wheel drive, that's already the case. On Horizon 4 and Horizon 3, they have huge tendencies to understeer to death. This greatly harms the performance of those cars in turns. And clearly something that works very well on these cars is to put the anti-roll bars at the front to the maximum flexibility and at the back to the maximum rigidity. By having a softer front and a stiffer rear, indeed the car will understeer less. On the contrary, if you want to limit oversteer, you can do the opposite. But overall, in this game, it's less annoying to have a car that oversteers than a car that understeers. However, indeed, if you make a setting, let's say other than a grip setting, if you want a drift setting, if you want to increase oversteer or what, you will need to test to adapt well to your car, depending on its type of transmission, the size of the car, its wheelbase. In any case, indeed, an anti-roll bar setting A1 for the front and A65 for the rear helps enormously to correct understeering. That's something that works like a charm. Moreover, it has minimal impact on acceleration and top speed. So, it's really a magical improvement that, in the end, I find, has no real downside. Next, we're going to get into something a bit more magical. The springs and shock absorbers on Forza Horizon 5. I admit that I don't always understand everything, and sometimes I feel like it's a bit of black magic. But with time and experience working on these 4 days, I'm beginning to grasp how they function. It hasn't been long since I understood, but basically there are several settings. So first, let's start with the simplest one. The ground clearance is the height of the car from the ground. The higher it is, the better. It improves acceleration. However, a less optimal road holding will result in a car that is less attached to the road, making it less efficient in a turn. Lower ground clearance means the car is closer to the ground, resulting in reduced acceleration. It doesn't change much, just hundredths or thousandths of a second, but it improves your road holding. Clearly, for drift, classic racing, turning, and other types of racing. Lower ground clearance is not bad, however, for drag or off-road, too low ground clearance. It's annoying, because in drag, you lose acceleration and it's a hassle. And off-road, a car that's too low can get stuck more easily on obstacles, which is not a good thing. Clearly, for off-roading and drag, it's better to go with higher ground clearance settings. Obviously, there too, you might want to combine it with off-road upgrades if you need them to raise your car even more. So, let's say that's the simple part of the springs. It also has an aesthetic impact on your car. Raising your car's height, say from 11 to 5.9 inches, will result in a noticeable difference in the game on your vehicle. So there you have it. For style as well, some people like to have a car that's more or less low. So then, after that, there are also personal tastes to take into account. Now, let's get into the subject, which is a bit of a hassle. For now, I understand these sections less than other sections in the settings, but I suppose it will come with time. What I understood is that basically, in terms of springs, there are softer springs at the front than at the rear. This allows for improved understeering. So there's less of it on front-wheel drive cars or on four-wheel drive cars. We'll discuss the differential more later in this video. A differential that would be pretty good, let's say, set on the front of the car, in terms of power distribution. So that basically is quite simple. Softer at the front than the rear, you correct a bit of understeer in the opposite. Harder at the front than the rear, you correct oversteer, which can be good for powerful propus or powerful four-wheel drives, which have a large part of the power going to the rear wheels. This will prevent too much skidding in the corners and, overall, drifting when you don't want to, which is still relatively rare with four-wheel drives, but with the propus it works quite well too. So, first thing to know next. Overall, softer springs are better for off-roading. Stiffer springs are better for races on, let's say, classic asphalt, in drag. In general, what also works quite well is a fairly soft front and a fairly stiff rear. For cars that are rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, the opposite, for cars that are front-wheel drive. Let's discuss shock absorbers. There's some mystery surrounding them, and while I don't fully understand everything, I know they generally work. Basically, for the rebound, know that a stiffer rebound at the front will give more grip on the rear wheels. This will increase understeer, of course, since you will have the car that will tend to lose grip at the front more. On the other hand, conversely, a less stiff rigidity at the front compared to the rear will increase the grip at the front and therefore, inevitably, increase the oversteer, since it will be rather the rear axle that will tend to lift off the ground in a turn. It's rare. Let's say explained like that it may sound a bit what the fuck, but basically that's how it works in the game. The little trap with the shock absorbers would be to believe that because you increase the understeer, it will decrease the oversteer. That's not necessarily the case. You have to test, because you can clearly end up with something poorly adjusted at the level of the shock absorbers. A poorly adjusted car can understeer when entering a turn and oversteer when exiting it. Overall, that's not what we expect from a fast sports car in Forza Horizon 5. So, it's been tested, but basically, if you want a car that oversteers more, well, in that case, you need to make an adjustment. To make a car less rigid at the front and more rigid at the back, you'll need the opposite setup if you want more oversteer. So that's for the rigidity. So that was for the rigidity of the relaxation, for the rigidity of the damping. What I know is that basically you have to put a value that actually corresponds to the one above, but multiplied basically by 0.5 or 0.6 or 0.7. The value here is approximately 60% of the value there. And the one that is here is about 60% of the one that is there. So, to be tested for refinement. I admit that, on this, I'm still working, because I don't really understand what it actually changes. I just know that it's explained like this in the game description. And that, overall, people who make adjustments, let's say good adjustments, that work well at the level of the shock absorbers, always put values in these ranges. Then, we have aerodynamics. An important thing on Forza Horizon 5, aerodynamic settings are not available on all cars. They are only available with cars that are considered to have race aerodynamics by default, or the cars on which you are going to put the Forza kit at the body kit level. In the front bumper, you will be given access to the front lift, and the spoiler will give you access to the rear lift. To get the settings for both, include front and rear in the configuration, which I didn't do on my Nissan GT-R, as I didn't like the Forza bumper. To get a car with better grip at high speeds, prioritize cornering performance when making adjustments. So, basically, for it to stick better to the road, you have high speeds, more than 250 or 300 kilometers per hour. On the other hand, if on the contrary you want more speed, in these cases you have to go more towards speed. It's not very complicated to understand, these settings are quite simple. However, if your goal is to make a car that accelerates quickly in a straight line, like a drag racer, simply do not put a body kit, do not put a Forza kit or anything, since even, let's say, set at full speed, the Forza kit will actually give you a lower speed than the same car that has no kit. So, for that matter, if your goal is just to have a good speed, just don't put anything at the aerodynamic level. Conversely, if you require additional support but your vehicle evidently lacks sufficient support in VMAX mode, you can prioritize speed over turning to rebalance things. It's easy to grasp. The setting can significantly impact various aspects, including cars, where the top speed can differ by 40-31 miles or h-ogs, and already the arrows that can pass on certain vehicles. From 2.6 to 2.8 when you are in full turn. So, for the moment, it's a simple setting, but it has a lot of impact on your car. Then, we have the braking. Braking is not very complicated to understand either, the balance of braking power. Basically, what I do is that I set it based on the weight distribution of my car. That is, if I have a car where 54% of the weight is at the front of the car, in those cases, I set the brake balance to 54% at the front, since there will be more weight to brake at the front than at the back. Know that a car that has too much braking at the front, but not enough at the back, the car tends to slide, especially when braking in turns, with the rear trying to overtake, which is annoying. In contrast, a car with excessive rear braking but insufficient front braking will become a real soap bar on the road, especially if you tend to brake late or during turns, like I sometimes do. Another thing, the braking power. I advise against modifying it too much, especially if you play without in-game assistance or electronic help, like I do. Overall, if you play with the ABS disabled, if you increase the braking power too much, you will quickly lose grip with your car. Notably, in Forza Horizon 5, the ABS and braking systems have been reworked. In short, I advise you to leave it at 100% if you play without ABS. Playing with 200% can make the game easier or harder, and you can set it up to 200%. But for the record, it's not a very big setting. Very important on braking. It's a bit of optimization, more than anything else. Just know that a well-adjusted brake pressure will allow you, on your side, with your brake trigger, to better feel when your car is going to brake. Keep a small margin in case you need to brake suddenly, whether it's a little or a lot. Especially if you try to do regressive braking or something like that, decreasing, rather on Forza Horizon. Then, it's more, let's say, optimization to gain a few tenths of a second per lap, a few hundredths rather than really. A big improvement, a crazy adjustment, and to finish the differential, so differential also, it's quickly complicated, because a bit like the shock absorbers actually, it will allow you to have either more understeer or more oversteer, without really correcting the opposite. That is to say, if you have too much understeer, it's not by increasing the oversteer that you will have less understeer. I don't know if what I'm saying is very clear. I feel like it's clear, but if it's not clear, ask me in the comments. But basically, how does it work? Actually, the differential is simple. For example, a four-wheel drive car like this one will allow, well, to say, basically, I want 80% of the engine power goes to the rear wheels and 20% to the front wheels, or 50. Or simply adjust the amount of power that will go through the front and rear axles. Overall, what I do for four-wheel drive cars, for example, is that, well, for drag, I put at least 80 or 90% of the power to the rear. In general, that's enough to make good starts, to optimize high-speed and low-speed acceleration by having a better VMAX. By the way, on occasions, without, let's say, burning out at the start, however, for off-road, better, you go towards the 50% without necessarily going to the other side. Let's say less than 50%, but within the 50%, it works pretty well. And also for the arenas, for multiplayer game modes like Infected, Capture the Flag, and others. A differential with quite a bit of power at the front will still help to take full advantage of the four-wheel drive for accelerations. And it might save your life several times. I won't delve too much into drifting here. I'd say that if you want to drift, it's because you're driving a rear-wheel drive vehicle. And so, in these cases, you don't need to adjust the balance with power. You won't even be able to do it. However, regarding the front and rear differential, know that a front differential set to lower on acceleration will tend to correct a little bit of understeer on front-wheel drive cars. And cars that are four-wheel drive with, well, a large part of the power that would be on the front wheels, which is quite rare. In certain situations and settings, it's possible. But that's exactly what I was saying earlier. Reducing understeer doesn't necessarily increase oversteer. At the rear, however, if you go to a higher setting and on acceleration, you will have more oversteer. So a car that could potentially drift better, but on the other hand, it will not correct any potential understeer problems. So that can be good, especially on drift settings. And it can also be good on all the big cars, so basically from category 1 to 10. On big cars that are in Pro Q or four-wheel drive to improve their road holding in turns. If ever you feel that it lacks a little bit in the turns. I've covered the basics of the settings on Forza Horizon 5. The optimal settings depend on your car, driving style, intended use, and whether you use a steering wheel or controller. There are a lot of factors to take into account. I think that, overall, on the tires, the gearbox, the anti-roll bars, the alignment, the aerodynamics, the braking, and the differential, there are a lot of sliders that you can try to copy on your side. The hardest things for me to adjust are the springs and shock absorbers. The result can vary significantly based on factors like surface, slope, and other variables. The video took a long time to shoot and was quite a hassle to make. I can't elaborate further because it's pointless. I had begun doing it on Forza Horizon 4. I made a video where, for 30 minutes, we talked a little bit about tire and differential settings. We went into much more detail than that, except that in fact I realized that it really served no purpose. In what sense? Anyway, if you don't use the same car as me for the setting in question, you won't necessarily get the same result. As a result, a 4-hour video on the setting won't necessarily provide much more information than a shorter video. A little bit in fast-forward mode like that, where you just have the basics, so to speak, of about 20 minutes. You will have likely understood as much about it as from a 4-hour video, where we precisely adjust various things on different cars. Driving a different car or having a different driving style will yield varying results. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I apologize if I'm unsure, but I'm going back. It's possible I may have gone a bit in all directions. That I may have used some unusual words, but I think I tried to explain a little bit each time. If it was roll, understeer, oversteer. If you have questions, ask them in the comments. Also, please like, share, and subscribe to this video. And of course, also remember that if you're interested, you can find me live on Twitch. Follow me by clicking the link below this video in the description or top comment. If you have Amazon Prime, don't hesitate on my Twitch channel to use your Twitch Prime. It will allow you to support me for free. It will give you bonus on my channel. Of course, you can also find me on Twitter and Facebook, on social media, to be aware of my news, to be able to send me private messages, that kind of thing. Be sure to support my channel visually by checking out the links below this video. To make your purchases, I have an Instagram gaming link, for example, which will allow you to support my channel for free by buying everything that will be games and subscription cards, then reduced. I have a Mattelnet link for what will be more PC components, peripherals, config, etc. For those who wish to support me financially in the long term, feel free to become a channel supporter. I have the join button on this video, There too, there are plenty of bonuses depending on the rank you will choose. I cut you off what you see here. I tell you see you soon. Hello everyone. Ciao.